Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang. Tonight, dramatic details from Nova Scotia. The stroke of luck that ended a rampage and the horrific way it began.
I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Also tonight, devastation in Quebec's long-term care homes.
Dehydration, kidney failure.
The problems are deeper than COVID-19.
I feel pretty good about it.
How Saskatchewan plans to reopen gently.
And Calgary gets hit hard again. The Stampede succumbs to the virus. This is The National. We begin with dramatic new revelations from the weekend massacre in Nova Scotia, including how it ended, an almost unbelievable fluke.
For the second time this week, the Nova Scotia RCMP declined to go on camera to update their investigation or answer questions. But CBC News has been digging on several fronts, talking with multiple sources to fill in the gaps and get at the truth. Kayla Hounsell begins with some of what we've uncovered using audio we've obtained of emergency dispatch messages.
It was here in the Portapique area that the shooter made his first stop in a deadly path of destruction. Now, CBC News has learned it was also here that police encountered a woman with whom the killer had been in a long-term relationship. She had been forcibly restrained, but survived. It's unclear whether she was injured or to what extent, just one part of a rapidly moving, chaotic scene.
Do we know if they've cut the assailant? No, not for sure. It's in quite a ways, the actual house. They're bringing the victims out to that intersection from the actual scene. But no, they don't know if they've caught him. I don't know.
As darkness turned to light, the manhunt persisted for hours. The RCMP are still saying very little about what happened yesterday.
I would like nothing more than to provide the media and public with the timeline, but it literally is still a work in progress. And it would be unfair and inappropriate for us to give that out in its current state. We are very close, I would say within a day.
But today, the force said nothing at all. Through multiple sources, CBC News has learned more about how the manhunt ended.
Roger, we have reports of the suspect down at the Enfield Big Stop.
Police have said they shot and killed the suspect here at this gas station Sunday morning. What they aren't saying is that it was only by chance. Police had tweeted Gabriel Wortman was no longer driving a police cruiser, but now a silver SUV. In fact, he had stolen another car from one of his victims, Gina Goulet. It was low on gas. And then, a remarkable coincidence. When he pulled up to the Irving Big Stop, the emergency response team and a K-9 unit officer were already there, also filling up in an unmarked vehicle. Sources say it was one of these officers who shot the gunman.
Yesterday, police said they're holding back the timeline because there are still gaps in it. They said any mistakes could impact both their investigation and the victims' families. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
So what about that elusive timeline? Once again, we've done our own digging to fill in some of the pieces. Thomas Degla takes us back to the start of that rampage.
Sunset in rural Nova Scotia usually signals a quiet night ahead, but not this time.
We're seeing huge flames of smoke from where we are.
Soon, more buildings went up in flames, shots were heard all around, but how many were dead, it was far too early to tell.
That's what they're saying. They do have another victim possibly on the scene. RCMP are requesting more ambulances, probably one more coming, and then at least one more standby.
At 11:32 p.m. on Twitter only, a first warning from police in Portapique to avoid the area. Stay in your homes with the doors locked. Then for a full 8.5 hours, there would be no update until the RCMP warned on Sunday morning of an active shooter situation. By then, police knew they were hunting for someone dressed just like them, driving a car just like theirs. But they kept that to themselves for more than an hour, tweeting only the suspect's name and picture at first.
Those details came in their totality to us early in the morning of Sunday, after a key witness was located and interviewed.
Perhaps lost in the scramble, a tip months earlier that Gabriel Wortman had a fully mocked-up RCMP cruiser. The gunman's former employer telling us Wortman showed him a picture of the car last year and that police had said to keep it on a trailer and off the road.
I mean, this was something that was professionally done. And what questions were asked as to why he was doing this? Did he hold himself out as a police officer when he had this done?
Even Sunday morning, it wasn't until 10:17 that police warned Nova Scotians the killer may be impersonating an officer. A potent disguise amid a chaotic response. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
So just how chaotic was that response? Well, some evidence now that police fired shots when the gunman was seemingly nowhere near. Here are some more revelations, more questions raised. Sunday morning, the Onslow Belmont Fire Hall was a refuge. Families who'd fled Portapique overnight were there registering for help. Did they know a 6-minute drive away there was panic? 10:12 a.m., this alert. Whatever drew emergency services ended fast. 10:20.
RCMP wishes to clear the scene. Copy that. I'll send out a stand-down page.
Less than 10 minutes later, mayhem back at the fire hall.
I saw a police car, or what I thought was a police car, pull up just the other side of the fire hall, and both doors opened, and 2 policemen got out and started shooting towards the building, the fire hall. So I ducked down and yelled to my husband to get down, and then I looked a little later and I saw a guy crouched down between the 2 cars in the building by the fire hall.
Look at the damage, the bullet holes. In a Facebook post, the fire chief wrote, "The gunfire caused considerable damage to our property, including taking one of our trucks out of service." The post has now been deleted.
Why were the police firing at the building? Like, why did they pull in and just start shooting right away? There's just a whole lot of unanswered questions.
We know now from the timestamp of this video that at 10:54 a.m., the gunman was in Millbrook, likely too far away to suggest he'd been at the fire hall. The police watchdog is investigating.
2 police officers are alleged to have discharged their firearms, fired their guns, but not at each other.
So what was happening? 11:05 a.m.
He's the member there. He's been shot in the foot.
He is Constable Chad Morrison. How did he get shot in the foot? We don't yet know. Within 45 minutes, the gunman was dead. New traumas beginning. So, of course, at the center of this story, the 22 Nova Scotians whose lives were cut short last weekend. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, beloved colleagues, and friends. Tomorrow night, CBC is carrying a special virtual vigil put together by the community of Colchester. You can watch it starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on CBC News Network, 7 p.m. Atlantic on CBC Television.
Turning now to this country's other major story. There are now more than 42,000 Canadian cases of COVID-19. And as economic pain and restlessness grow, a focus for officials, the continuing threat to lives.
We actually don't know enough about the trajectory of this virus. We're learning about it every day.
If we look over time at deaths per 100,000 people, we can chart COVID-19's impact on Canada's population. It's faring better than some of the world's hardest hit countries like Italy, the UK, and the US, but not quite matching Germany's path. So what's driving deaths here? Well, based on the incomplete data we have so far, of the more than 2,200 COVID-19 deaths in Canada, about 65% are in long-term care homes. Scenes like this one on the front page of today's Toronto Sun, hitting close to home for Ontario Premier Doug Ford.
That's heartbreaking. You know, I relate to it in our own family, as I mentioned, with my wife Carla. Anyways, the system, we can do better.
Ford's office confirmed his 95-year-old mother-in-law has tested positive for COVID-19, but Quebec's long-term care crisis is even worse than the rest of Canada's. And Alison Northcott found signs the threat to seniors' lives runs deeper than just the coronavirus.
At this Montreal hospital, Dr. Vin Kim Nguyen says he's seen an uptick in patients coming from long-term care homes with serious health problems beyond COVID-19.
Problems that are more of general deterioration, dehydration, kidney failure, rather than fever and pneumonia per se.
A sign he says some homes are struggling to meet residents' basic needs.
Clearly, some of the residences, some of the facilities are overwhelmed, and they're sending us patients they just don't feel they have the staff to care for.
80% of Quebec's COVID-19 deaths have been in long-term care or seniors' homes, some dealing with major outbreaks and a critical shortage of workers.
Lack of food, lack of regular meals, and dehydration.
Debbie Newton believes that is what led to her mother Nancy's death at a home earlier this month. She says her health deteriorated after the province banned caregivers from coming in to help regular staff.
You want to die with dignity. You don't want to die from a lack of care. The system just didn't, even before any of this, didn't have enough staff.
The head of the company that owns that home has said its residents are not dying from a lack of care. And the province says it's now allowing some caregivers back into some homes.
Some of them are literally abandoned.
But it's too late, says this advocate who has filed a human rights complaint.
These people are literally infringed and violated in their constitutional rights to safety, to integrity, and to dignity. And that's so shameful.
I don't like to hear those stories more than you, but we're trying to do our best in order that it doesn't happen too many times.
The province has asked for the help of 1,000 more soldiers to help fill the need left by nearly 10,000 healthcare workers off sick or afraid. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
In care homes, it's lives at stake. Across the country, it is also livelihoods. Most smaller businesses are either shut down or struggling to stay open. The government has loaned them a lifeline, but as Ashley Burke explains, it might not be reaching those who need it.
For decades, Francois Bruno has been handcrafting Muskoka chairs for clients around the world, a business his father passed down that he fears could collapse without a bank loan.
Well, it could be the difference between surviving and not.
He lost 75% of his business because of COVID-19, so turned to Export Development Canada for help.
They told me that I'd be available for help through their BCAP program, which they guarantee loans to small and medium-sized businesses for up to 80%.
But his bank told him small business clients are not eligible, only companies with more than $15 million in revenues.
I think this is wrong.
Started in 1876.
The owner of this family maple syrup business applied for the same loan, and he says it's been a nightmare.
I feel like there's a lot of lip service being done, and a lot of, we're here to support the small business, but I don't see a lot of action, I guess.
Export Development Canada says several financial institutions are already looking to make the loan accessible to more small businesses. But at the end of the day, it's up to the banks.
Because this is done in partnership with the financial institutions, it really is up to each financial institution to set its own criteria and engage with its own definition, really, of what a small business person would be.
The government guarantee does not throw the bank rules out the window. Those rules require a due diligence investigation of the full application.
Lee also says banks would be on the hook for 20% of the loan if it can't be repaid.
The banks want to make sure that they're going to get their money back in the end. And I kind of understand that, but at the same time, we're hurting as a business, and so are many other small businesses.
For its part, the government says this is a big program, and while relationships between small businesses and banks are going well, they expect individual challenges. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, 6 weeks after the pandemic was declared, provinces are planning their comebacks. But with the virus hitting some parts of Canada harder than others, timelines will vary.
What we're doing at the federal level is attempting to pull together and coordinate all different provinces so that we are working from a similar set of guidelines and principles.
PEI said this week it hopes to reopen businesses in early May. Manitoba wants to ease restrictions in the coming weeks. But today, Saskatchewan became the first province to outline a concrete step-by-step plan to do just that. Bonnie Allen shows us how it'll work.
Yes, people are happy, but not like this. And this won't happen for a long time.
Today I'm announcing our plan to gradually, cautiously, and methodically reopen businesses.
It's a 5-phase plan that starts the first Monday in May. That's when people can access medical services, the dentist, or physical therapist. By mid-May, they can hit the golf course. In Phase 2, retail outlets and hair salons can reopen their doors, with campgrounds not far behind.
I feel pretty good about it.
Businesses must enforce physical distancing and stringent cleaning.
We can wear masks, and we can limit our numbers of people in the salon, and we can limit how far apart the clients are.
But Annabelle Townsend is not as excited. She plans to delay the opening of her bookstore.
Books are not the sort of things you can disinfect seasonally, and even if I put a screen up or wear a mask while I'm serving customers or anything, it's not going to stop people thumbing through books and browsing.
Plus, she has children, and schools remain closed. The owner of this restaurant feels the same.
Part of me wants it to be open, and the other half of me is scared of a spike.
The final phases don't have set dates. It will depend on the number of COVID-19 cases. But Phase 3 would include opening restaurants and bars at 50% capacity, as well as daycares. Pools and playgrounds follow. Large gatherings would be last. Restrictions on travel and seniors' care homes remain in effect indefinitely.
The most important thing to do is to think about new cases that are going to walk, drive, or fly back into the province. And that's where an emphasis on testing is going to be very important.
And this plan is for Saskatchewan residents. It's not an invitation to other Canadians to come here for a golf game and haircut. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Regina.
For the first time in almost a century since it became an annual event, the Calgary Stampede will not go ahead this summer. As Aaron Collins explains, officials say it's just too risky.
The Calgary Stampede has bucked and roped its way through everything from world wars to the Great Depression over the years. Not even the floodwaters that enveloped the city and the grounds in 2013 could stop it. Back then, organizers said the show would go on come hell or high water. But even from the Cowboys who count on it most, no such bravado this time.
The health of our fans, our sponsors, our supporters, the people that volunteer at these venues, the people that work for us behind the scenes in the barns, there's no need to put them at risk for chuckwagon racing.
Of course, the Stampede is more than just a rodeo. It's a symbol of civic pride, attracting tourists from around the world and pumping around $500 million into the local economy. Its cancellation, another blow for the city.
The triple whammy is the public health impact, the global recession that's being brought on by the virus, and the never-before-seen challenges in the energy sector in oil and gas.
The Stampede may be down and out this year, but organizers say the greatest outdoor show on earth will surely ride again. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
Alberta, meanwhile, reported 2 more deaths today as a result of COVID-19. Both are linked to the JBS meat plant that's southeast of Calgary. To date, the plant in Brooks has seen 124 cases, with more positive results expected in the coming days. This is the second plant in the province dealing with a major outbreak. The cargo facility in High River was forced to close after being linked to nearly 500 cases.
We're putting in place an additional $1.1 billion for a national medical and research strategy.
And that is some major money being announced in Ottawa today towards the scientific fight against COVID-19. The funds will be allocated towards developing treatments, testing Canadians, and discovering a vaccine. And Canada's cities are asking the federal government for $10 to $15 billion in emergency funds as they deal with the financial crisis brought on by COVID-19. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities says the pandemic has led to a plunge in revenues from services like transit and recreational facilities.
Well, most clinics and doctors' offices have changed procedures during the pandemic, including seeing patients virtually. But some things need to happen in person. Vaccination is one of them. And Vicadopia tells us why doctors are warning about the risk of putting those on hold.
In an alley off a main road is a street clinic like no other. The patients are all babies, here for their regular vaccines. The cries of Violet Millette offer a kind of relief to her mom.
We just wanted to make sure that we were keeping on top of her schedule, and we were concerned because of what's going on right now that we weren't going to be able to do that.
Patients are really scared of coming into the clinic, so this is a way for us to vaccinate our children in our community while at the same time limiting our PPE burn rate.
With daycares and schools closed, immunization requirements aren't being enforced, and physical distancing doesn't offer universal protection against diseases.
Bacterial meningitis can be acquired from a completely healthy child or adult who carries the bacteria in their nose or throat. They might have an older child in their own home who has that bacteria, who could then spread it to the younger child.
Globally, child immunization rates have been making historic progress. Still, when it comes to measles, 10% aren't vaccinated, so outbreaks continue, even in developed countries, and few places actually have enough children immunized to ensure herd immunity.
Measles anywhere is measles everywhere.
The WHO worries hard-won gains could be lost if delays in vaccinations go from weeks to months.
Not immunizing a group of infants is going to lead to a large number of kids who are non-immune, and we have a really big issue then of outbreaks of disease happening, non-COVID outbreaks, and that would be really bad.
The WHO recently listed vaccine hesitancy next to pandemics as global public health threats. If anything, COVID-19 is a reminder of what life could be like if children miss their vaccines. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
Tonight is the first night of Ramadan, a time of fasting and prayer, and usually it would also be a time for family and community gatherings, but not this year. Chris Glover shows us how some Muslims in Canada are adapting.
Oh, he's putting up a sign that says Ramadan Mubarak. That means Happy Ramadan.
Just like the little monkey in her book, 3-year-old Nerea Mawani is curious about Ramadan. Her dad is curious about how it'll work this year, too.
With the fridge so close to proximity, the distractions are going to be much more difficult to manage.
As is Muslim tradition, the Vancouver parents will abstain from food, even water, sunrise to sunset for the month of Ramadan.
I think we're going to really miss having bigger dinner parties to celebrate the end of fast.
Abstaining from one another due to COVID-19 will be an even bigger test of faith.
This pandemic is actually giving Muslims an opportunity to now practice that self-discipline.
Fruit, veggie, and chicken and rice.
Delivering food to those in need in Toronto, Soraya Ibrahim says giving remains the true meaning of Ramadan.
The sense of charity that we will continue doing it, and it won't be the same definitely, but still there is people who are helping out.
A month in which we are united.
From encouraging donations to orphans overseas to delivering thousands of COVID relief kits across Canada, Muslims have already been helping during the pandemic. This Imam's Toronto area mosque donated $25,000 worth of personal protective equipment to the local hospital.
It has forced us to come together as a, humanity at large, to work with one another.
Since people can't physically come together, a national Muslim organization is hosting nightly virtual events.
We want to be able to give people that spiritual boost for the night at home.
Hopefully all of us can take moments in our day to also be grateful for what we have.
Especially amid the loneliness, that lesson is more important than ever. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
In an election year with no rallies, President Trump has found a way to campaign anyway.
You know you're a fake. You know that.
Up next, how he's using his pandemic press briefings to get out his political message.
Plus, it's At Issue Night. Rosie and the gang on how the provinces are handling COVID-19 and the plans to reopen.
And jokes for sale.
What's a pirate's favorite planet?
The Vancouver Island kid who is about to brighten your day. We're back in 2.
is a pent-up demand in our country to get it back right where it was and maybe even better, and that's what's going to happen.
The American president called for continued diligence today while eyeing a phased reopening of the economy. But even he has said Georgia's plan to get businesses back up and running tomorrow is too soon. Minnesota and Tennessee are aiming for next week, but the United States is still very much in crisis. There are nearly 900,000 cases of COVID-19 there, with more than 49,000 deaths. At his daily press briefings, Donald Trump has been accused of sending mixed messages, spreading false information, and now, as Katie Simpson tells us, of campaigning for votes.
Always the showman. There's no other place the president appears more at ease. Now, unable to campaign because of coronavirus, Donald Trump has found a way to make sure the show still goes on.
I'm the president and you're fake news. The states that seem to have the problem happen to be Democrat. I'm not a doctor, but I'm like a person that has a good you-know-what.
The White House coronavirus task force briefing has become, in part, a vehicle for Trump to deliver campaign-style attacks.
Sleepy Joe, he's constantly naming the wrong state. If Sleepy Joe won, they own our country. And you wonder, the press is in hysteria mode. CNN, fake news, and their camera just went off. As I say, that's fake news, and CNN is fake news like crazy, and they had just totally the wrong story, which they knew.
The president has been outstanding.
And then there was the day he tried to recast his handling of the outbreak, using the public health briefing to play what looked like a re-election ad, highlighting only positive takes on his response.
His base is going to love everything that he's saying, and he's making the bet that he can win re-election with dividing the country that way and just eke out a win.
750 million.
Cable news networks are struggling with whether to air the briefings live, since there is vital information in and around the rhetoric.
I think it's pretty indefensible to not cover the President of the United States. If they want to provide analysis, they want to fact check, they can do that when it's over. They can do that all night. They have all the hours in the day to do that.
The president knows these briefings are an opportunity to speak directly to Americans. And since he feels he's covered unfairly by the press, expect them to continue. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Still ahead on the national pandemic politics on this side of the border. With each province charting a different path to reopening, Rosie and the Ad Issue Gang on how Ottawa plans to manage it all.
And as we do every night, we take your COVID-19 questions, including this one about disinfecting things. If the virus only survives for 2 days on a surface, can I disinfect basically anything by just letting it sit? We're back after this. Welcome back. Time to get to your COVID-19 questions. Respirologist Dr. Samir Gupta joining us right now. Hello to you, Dr. Gupta, and let's get to our first question. Is it possible to build up immunity by being exposed to smaller doses of the virus over time? I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, so I guess it's the Princess Bride approach. It doesn't really seem to work that way. For our body to sort of mount what we call an immune response, for our cells to produce those antibodies to the virus, our body really needs exposure to the virus. So the virus needs to get in. So in that sense, it's an all or none in the sense that you have to get infected to have that immunity to it. I will say that not all infections are the same, though. You might have a casual encounter and have a low dose of virus exposure, and that might lead to a more mild infection. Whereas if you're, let's say, a healthcare worker dealing with a sick patient, you might have a high viral dose exposure, and that might lead to a more severe infection.
Okay. Here's a crystal ball question, as I like to call them. When will the second wave come in Canada?
I think the second wave question really depends on two things. One is the biology of the virus itself, and the second is the decisions we make as a society with respect to easing the social distancing restrictions. With respect to the biology, it's a novel virus, so we don't really know, but we might draw some parallels from other coronaviruses that cause the common cold. Those coronaviruses do tend to get worse in the spring and winter, and because of heat and humidity, where they seem to be less stable, they seem to go down in the summer. So we might see a bit of a break and then a second wave in the fall and winter. But that idea of a summer lull might be a little bit of wishful thinking as well, because we are seeing a lot of this coronavirus transmission in warmer parts of the world like India now. The second piece has to do with what we do with respect to social distancing, and we've seen now in a few countries. We've seen in Singapore, in Japan, and now in India, we've seen the second wave occur because of relaxing of these social distancing rules. So that's really on us to decide.
I've got time for one more question here. If the virus only survives for 2 days on a surface, can I disinfect basically anything by just letting it sit?
The answer to that is probably yes. In fact, we do leave our Amazon packages out for a day before we bring them in. One thing to be aware of, though, is that the virus decays at different rates on different surfaces. So this was studied, and they showed that on stainless steel and plastic, there was still a little bit of virus present after 72 hours, whereas on cardboard, all of it was gone after 24 hours. So it depends on the surface.
Very interesting. Dr. Gupta, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And as we've mentioned, we will be asking your questions about COVID-19 every night. So send them in. You can message us directly on Instagram at CBC The National, or send us an email at covid@cbc.ca. Just put The National in the subject line. And we've also been taking a look at how COVID-19 has changed how we think about regular everyday things, like stocking up, for instance. Tonight in our pandemic how-to guide, bottled water. We learned quite early in this pandemic not to hoard these, but what about bottled water? Well, to answer that question, let's ask a different one. How likely is our drinking water supply to get infected?
It's very safe to assume that the tap water that we have is not going to be able to be contaminated with this infection.
That's because drinking water is filtered and chlorinated. This coronavirus doesn't survive that, full stop. It's a respiratory illness. So if you did stock up on bottled water, it would have to be because you're hedging against some bigger systemic problem, like if some critical piece of water infrastructure were to suddenly get disrupted or shut down entirely. You can decide how likely that is. I certainly don't have a crystal ball, but no, you don't get COVID-19 from drinking water. If you do decide to switch to bottled water, just remember, you should be the only one drinking out of it.
Still ahead on The National, a little levity for dark times. We'll take you to a joke stand in Saanich, BC. But first, it's Thursday. That means Rosie's here with that issue.
Adrian, this week we are looking at how the provinces are handling the pandemic, between plans to reopen their economies, some requests for the military to help in long-term care homes. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea will join me and all of you right after the break.
I believe that Saskatchewan can find the right path. I believe we can carefully and cautiously begin to reopen our province while still protecting Saskatchewan residents from the spread of COVID-19.
Saskatchewan was the first to unveil a detailed plan for a gradual reopening of its economy, but it's certainly not the only province moving in that direction. What does this tell us about how the provinces themselves are managing this crisis? Is there a need for some sort of national coordination? It's Thursday, and I'm here with At Issue. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Althea Raj is in Ottawa tonight. It's no joke that this is the only way we do know it's Thursday, for real. Many people agree with me on Twitter. Okay, so the first example is Saskatchewan, but certainly we're hearing rumblings out of British Columbia, even Quebec, talking about returning to school. What do we make of these plans, not in the specific way, but the kind of way that they plan to unfold and the federal role that might be part of that? I'll start with you, Chantal.
It's totally normal that provinces will be moving at a different pace because the pandemic is hit in different ways in all of those provinces. In this province where I live, the hardest hit so far, there is a huge difference between the Montreal area in the large sense of the word and the rest of the province of Quebec. So the expectation is that there will be liberalization outside of the larger Montreal area long before it happens in the city. I think that's totally normal, and I sense that if there's a federal role in there, it may be in agreeing with the provinces on a set of standards that allow you to say go. But otherwise, provinces do have control over their school system, which is key to reopening the economy, sure. And they will be going at their own pace.
And Andrew, what would that federal role be like if it's not their jurisdiction, but certainly they are playing the role of coordinator in the midst of all this?
Well, there's going to have to be some pretty close coordination because people move around. I mean, unless we're going to continue to maintain interprovincial controls, and maybe that's part of the mix, but otherwise, if a province liberalizes and finds that it gets another outbreak, some of those people may wind up infecting people in other provinces. So it's not quite a simple matter as letting every province go at its own speed. Secondly, the whole thing strikes me as a little bit premature. I grant that the Saskatchewan model is gradual and it does a little bit at a time depending upon how much close contact with the public a business has, et cetera. But unless you accompany it with much higher levels of testing so that basically you can pounce on every individual case as it shows up, go after the contacts, isolate them if you have to, all of the measures that public health advocates advise, then even if you're going gradually, you're not necessarily in safe territory.
And Althea, how much of that will provinces be receptive to? I know there's another call on Friday between the Prime Minister and Premiers.
Well, I assume that it's already kind of been decided because the two things that Andrew and Chantal just suggested are things that federal officials have already said that they are doing. So today there was an announcement about ramping up testing nationally. There was an announcement about just the set of standards that Chantal was talking about like this is the checklist that we would like to ensure that you can scratch off before you open up local economies. And I think the point about regional differences is a really good one. I mean, Calgary is experiencing a very different caseload than Edmonton, for example. And so what does that mean, not just for interprovincial travel, but within the provinces themselves? And we don't know enough about the virus. And I think that's something else that federal officials have really stressed. We don't know how long immunity lasts. There's a ton of stuff that we don't know. And so the government is investing in more money to try to figure out all the stuff we don't know.
But there is one thing we do know, and it is that the current status quo is untenable for a year or 2 years. So places will open up. There will be trial and errors. In places like Quebec and Toronto, no one's going to be hitting the beaches in PEI. If PEI opens up, it's not even clear that people in Montreal will be able to go to the Laurentians anytime soon.
I hadn't thought about the complications inside a province itself. I want to hit on the other topic I think that is an important one, and that is the Premier's calling in the need for military assistance in long-term care homes in Quebec and Ontario. The Prime Minister, I won't play the clip, but the Prime Minister today said, this is unacceptable, this shouldn't be happening, soldiers shouldn't be looking after seniors. Obviously, it's not the fault, I don't think, of any one provincial government. This would have happened over a period of time. But how should we view this, Andrew, in terms of provincial leadership, the fact that we are at this point now in the two biggest provinces?
It's a scandal. I agree with you that it's a scandal that governments own collectively and all parties own. It is easy, obviously, also to say in hindsight, but it is certainly revealing conditions in some of these long-term care homes, leave aside the pandemic, that in some cases were a scandal. And certainly they seem not to have been nearly prepared. Governments have been playing catch-up, federal and provincial, all the way through this. We've seen this at the federal level in terms of not closing the borders when they might have, of being all over the map on the question of masks, et cetera. So while obviously we're focused right now on trying to save lives and get through this crisis, there will need to be a stock taking after this, not necessarily to point fingers, but to find out where we were deficient at the federal level in terms of their preparedness, and in this particular case, the provinces with their management of the group homes.
Althea, on the same topic.
We heard Patty Hajdu, the Minister of Health, say that there will be a stock taking nationally about what to do with regards to long-term care homes. But I think this is one of numerous examples that I think have come to the forefront because of COVID-19 to kind of make us realize about some of the gaps in our system, whether it's, really low welfare payments or the situation in long-term care homes, local manufacturing, the safety of the food supply. So many different things have come to the forefront because of this. And this is sadly one very stark example.
Chantal.
Let me take you out of this pandemic. We've just realized all of this. To take you back, I've been covering politics maybe for too long. Was it 2004, Paul Martin and the healthcare accord that was supposed to fix the healthcare system for a generation or forever, and the home care chapter of it? Because we would not have systemized parking older Canadians in homes if we had developed a home care system as part of our Medicare system. So before we fix let's make sure that all those homes are well maintained in the future, possibly a step back to say, if we offered more home care, we would have less elderly people in homes.
Okay, on that, I'm going to leave it. Thank you all very much, as always. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast. We put extra content there, and this week we're talking about what happens to a government when it just keeps facing crisis after crisis. Look for it on any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational. For now, though, back to Adrian and Andrew in Toronto.
And next on The National, figuring out how to get pro sports players back on the field. Here's one wild solution from Taiwan. So what are the big leagues working on? Next.
We hope the draft will provide a break from everyday challenges. Let us dream of better days. Oh, come on, guys, you can do better than that.
And that is NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell hosting tonight's NFL Draft from home. Usually the three-day extravaganza rivals the hype of the Super Bowl. The NFL and other leagues want to play during the pandemic, even if it means to empty stadiums. As Jamie Strachan explains, the only game in town these days is figuring out how to do it.
On April 29, 2015, a Major League Baseball game unlike any other took place. There was civil unrest in Baltimore, and for security reasons, spectators were barred from the stadium. The Orioles played the White Sox with no one in the stands. It seems wrong. No roar of the crowd, none of the atmosphere that gives live sports its buzz. But what seems so wrong could be exactly the right prescription as professional sports plot a return.
Mass gatherings is not in any of our near future. I think that is sort of pretty evident.
So far, the model being floated by most professional leagues involves playing games in one city, so no travel. The NHL has talked about the idea of playing in multiple cities, but for all leagues, players and staff would be tested often and stay in hotels isolated from their families.
We had a great day with this club yesterday.
The PGA has proposed moving forward with 4 events without spectators, starting in June.
We are going to need to be able to test players, caddies, and other constituents before we return, but we need to do so in a way that's not going to take away from the critical need that we're currently facing.
Other parts of the world have already started. In Taiwan, pro baseball games have returned. Instead of fans, cardboard cutouts and robots filled the stands. It's not just empty stadiums. All of these plans would require players to live in a bubble, perhaps for months.
My wife is pregnant. What am I going to do when, she goes into labor? Am I going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks after I come back? Because, obviously I can't miss that, birth of our first child.
Health officials stress that no matter how eager leagues are to get back in the game, minimizing the spread of the virus must be the priority before the roar of the crowd fills these stadiums again. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
Okay, next on The National, we could all use a smile these days. Enter Callahan.
What is black, white, and red? A penguin that's embarrassed.
His twist on the old lemonade stand next. During a pandemic, a lemonade stand may not be a winning idea, but 6-year-old Callahan McLaughlin has a new tonic in mind. A free walk by, drive by, however you want to go by, joke stand. And during such a hard week, the smiles he helps deliver, that's our moment.
What is red, white, and blue?
What?
A sad candy cane. There's a lot of stress in the world, and I kind of want to get some smiles on people's faces.
Callahan's a fairly social child and has also had a lot of success having lemonade stands in the past. So I came up with the idea of the joke stand because this is also a child who walks around our house telling us jokes.
What did the tie say to the neck?
What?
I think I'll hang around for a while. Not a lot of people out and about now, so it makes me feel good when I can do a little social distancing joke with them. What did one toilet say to the other toilet?
Oh gosh, I don't have a clue. I don't know.
You look a bit flushed.
Oh, you're good.
I don't think I have any bad jokes, but my sister has awful ones. What's a pirate's favorite planet?
What?
Mars.
Mars. I love it. So Callahan, somebody asked him, do you want any money for your jokes? And he said, no. Right now, people need their money for groceries, not jokes. Good on him.
Boy, yeah, no kidding. Callahan, if I can just say directly to you, your jokes are amazing. Your delivery is spot on. Keep it up. That's amazing. That's from all of us. That's the National for this Thursday, April 23rd. Have a great night.
Good night.